How childhood trauma affects our growth, a journey to healing emotional wounds. Hello friends. Have you ever wondered why you behave a certain way? Why it feels so hard to connect with others? Or why there's this emptiness inside you that you just can't put into words? Sometimes, the answers lie not in the present, but in the distant echoes of the past, in the wounds we carry from our childhood. You see, childhood trauma, though often invisible, can deeply shape who we become as adults. It doesn't just fade away. Instead, it quietly influences how we see ourselves, how we build relationships, and even how we recall our past. In today's conversation, let's explore how childhood trauma can impact our journey into adulthood. We'll talk about why some people can't remember their early years, the struggles with emotional regulation and decision-making, the difficulty in building healthy relationships, and how negative experiences within the family can distort our self-image. Understanding the root of our struggles is the first step toward healing and personal growth. How childhood trauma shapes us. Understanding developmental trauma. So how exactly do these wounds affect us as we grow? Let's start by understanding the concept of developmental trauma. This refers to psychological harm that occurs during childhood, not necessarily from one shocking event, but often from prolonged experiences like chronic neglect, abuse, or growing up in a highly stressful family environment. What's crucial here is this: when a child faces overwhelming stress but doesn't have a caregiver to help them regulate those emotions, or worse, when the caregiver is the source of the stress, the child is left emotionally stranded. You can picture a young brain as fertile soil. If that soil is surrounded by fear and a lack of love, the brain's wiring will develop very differently than in an environment filled with safety, love, and nurture. The earlier trauma occurs, when the brain is still fragile and forming, the deeper and longer lasting its impact. This kind of trauma affects how we build our identity, how we see our worth, how we balance reason and emotion, whether we feel safe in the world, and ultimately, how we answer the question, who am I really? Let's take a closer look at 6 common ways childhood trauma can shape who we become in adulthood. Recognizing these patterns helps us see where we need to begin on our healing journey. 1. Lost childhood. I never really had a childhood, or, I don't remember much of growing up. One of the clearest and most heartbreaking signs of early trauma is the feeling that your childhood was stolen from you. Have you ever heard someone say, I never really had a childhood, or, I can't remember much about growing up? This is actually quite common in those who went through distress during their early years. Their memories might feel like fragments, vivid in some moments, but disconnected and lacking a coherent story, like scattered snapshots with no narrative to tie them together. Without a foundational story of our early years, forming a solid adult identity becomes much harder. We need to know where we came from to understand who we are and where we're going. When those foundations are shaky, the entire structure of our identity struggles to stand firm. 2. Persistent emptiness. I always feel like something's missing, but I don't know what. Memory isn't the only thing affected. Our sense of self can also feel fragmented or incomplete. Do you often feel like something's missing, without knowing exactly what that something is? This sense of emptiness often stems from children who had to disconnect from important parts of themselves just to survive. It's a protective mechanism called dissociation. A child might construct a perfect version of themselves, like being the obedient, high-achieving student, to create stability and pretend that everything is fine. But behind that mask, their emotional life may be impoverished or numb. As adults, these individuals might carry a vague feeling that they've lost a part of themselves. The good news is, it's possible to reclaim those lost parts through self-exploration or therapy. Often, those missing pieces are tied to very specific emotions and memories. Reconnecting with them helps restore a more complete and authentic identity. 3. Drawn to destructive relationships. The loop of hurt. Why do we keep choosing the wrong people? Another common pattern is repeating harmful relationships. Do you find yourself always attracted to people who are bad for you? It might seem ironic, but this is not unusual for those who were hurt by the very people who were supposed to care for them. Consciously, they want healthy relationships, but unconsciously, they're drawn to people who resemble those old, painful patterns. They're seeking a match for their wounded identity, which leads to reliving the same pain again and again, in friendships, romantic relationships, even in professional settings. They may end up with emotionally unavailable or abusive partners, or take on the role of the rescuer, trying to fix others. There might be intense chemistry at first, creating the illusion that this time will be different, but soon enough, the old pain resurfaces. Even when friends try to intervene, they may ignore warnings and dive headfirst into another toxic situation. This cycle creates confusion and self-doubt. It traps them in their outdated, wounded identity and blocks them from building a healthier one. 4. Avoiding relationships. The fear of intimacy. I'd rather be alone. Some people respond to trauma by choosing the opposite path. They shut their hearts completely. They think, it's better if I'm alone. Rather than seeking out relationships, they avoid intimacy and isolate themselves. Sometimes this starts early, and sometimes it's a later response after being hurt too many times. They build emotional walls to protect themselves from future pain. But this avoidance creates its own problems. Healthy relationships are vital for growth. They teach us, help us evolve, and support our healing. Cutting off these connections, even for self-protection, can stall our development. It reinforces the belief that we're unlovable, unworthy, or too flawed, and that we're destined to live in loneliness. Sometimes, the fear of being hurt again drives us to push good people away, making us the biggest threat to our own happiness. 5. Avoiding the self. I don't like thinking about myself. It only makes me feel worse. Not only do we avoid others, we may avoid ourselves. Do you ever feel like, thinking about myself just makes me feel bad? This is especially true when the trauma involves our closest relationships, with parents, siblings, or caregivers. Anything that reminds us of those painful experiences can trigger a defense response. We run away from our own emotions and memories. Self-awareness and self-care often suffer deeply. People learn to live disconnected from their feelings and needs. Reflecting inward becomes frightening, and they avoid any encouragement to do so. Their self-image is usually harsh, marked by self-loathing and shame, built around a rigid, wounded identity. In severe cases, this avoidance can lead to self-destructive behaviors. 6. When emotions feel foreign. I'm not someone who feels deeply about things. Lastly, trauma can profoundly affect how we feel and manage emotions. Do you ever think, I'm not a very emotional person? In households where emotions were dismissed or unwelcome, people learn to suppress them. The emotions are still there, but they become disconnected from the person's identity. This disconnection creates confusion and instability, because when we can't understand our feelings, we struggle to make wise decisions. Some people feel emotionally numb, or, paradoxically, like they don't feel anything at all. Their emotional range narrows. They might only recognize vague feelings like frustration or boredom, or they suppress dissatisfaction until it explodes into uncontrollable anger. Often, they experience only negative self-directed emotions, like disgust or hatred, and reject any positive affirmation. Compliments feel suspicious. Gratitude makes them uncomfortable, and kindness from others is met with doubt. They may mask their insecurity behind intellect, seriousness, or social awkwardness. The healing journey. Where do you begin? By now, You might feel a little heavy-hearted, realizing how deep the impact of childhood trauma can be. Facing the past and building a new identity beyond it is not an easy journey. But here's the good news: healing is possible. Therapy and self-exploration truly work. The process of facing pain, recovering, and growing often takes longer than we hope. But reconnecting with our true selves is a layered journey, one that requires patience. The most important thing is to believe that a fuller, more meaningful life is within reach, and worth working toward. Start by learning to care for yourself more. Allow yourself to seek help from others, even if trust was broken in the past. And finally, nurture self-compassion and patience. These may feel difficult at first, but they are priceless companions on your path to healing. Final words. Overcoming childhood trauma is not a sprint. It's a long-distance journey that demands perseverance and courage. Recognizing how the past shapes the present is the first crucial step. Remember, you are not alone. Seeking support is not a sign of weakness, but of strength and a deep desire to live a more fulfilling life. Thank you for being here and for listening.